Good evening. I'd like to call the May 6, 2019 Davie County Commissioners meeting to order. This time I would ask Commissioner Jones to lead us in the invocation.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come here tonight and to do the business of this great county that you sovereignly placed us in. Father, we thank you for your mercy, your grace, your goodness. We thank you for the many blessings you bestowed in our lives. Father, we thank you for the families that make up this great county. Father, we thank you for our law enforcement, our EMS, our fire that keeps our streets safe. We thank you for the schools that educate our children. Father, you have blessed us in immense ways, and we come here tonight, even in doing the business of this county, to honor you, to praise you, and to thank you. So, Lord, give us wisdom tonight and discernment, Father, to follow your will and your agenda, and Father, to do the business that you've called us to do. Lord, we thank you, and we give you praise. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Got a great crowd out tonight. Appreciate everyone coming out. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Have a second.
Second.
Second. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that is approved. Next, we move to public comment. Mr. Vogler, do we have anyone?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we have no one who signed up for public comment tonight.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Right. Next item on the agenda is we have two public hearings tonight on two rezoning issues. So I will ask Amy Litz to come forward.
Hello. We have the first of two down zonings tonight. The first one is by Miss Nancy Ward. She owns 3.8 acres at 141 Gowan Way. Of that 3.8 acres, 1.4 acres is zoned industrial level 2. That zoning change was made in 1994. Her request is to remove the I-2 and make all of the property RA. Currently, there's a house on the property and a storage building in the I-2 area of the property. The land use plan shows this as rural residential and a rural growth area on the growth enhancement strategy. This is a duly advertised public hearing. The planning board heard the request at their March 26th meeting, voted unanimously. We have not received any calls, comments, concerns about this request. The action before the board tonight is to approve. The amendment promotes the public health, safety, and general welfare and is consistent with all applicable adopted plans. The board considers the action to be reasonable and in the public interest. That said approval furthers the goals, objective, actions, and policies of the land development plan and growth enhancement strategy because it eliminates more intense uses on the property and reduces land use incompatibilities by reverting back to a residential classification or deny or defer. So if you have any questions.
Anybody have any questions at this time for Ms. Litz? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, this is a public hearing, so I will turn it over to Mr. Vogler.
Chairman has announced this is the day and hour of the public hearing pursuant to Chapter 153A of the North Carolina General Statutes and pursuant to Section 153.251 of the Davie County Code of Ordinances. This board is conducting a public hearing on Nancy R. Ward's request to rezone 1.4 acres of land from Industrial 2 to Residential RA. The property is located at 141 Gavin Road and described as tax map parcel K7-18. There has been due publication and notice of the public hearing in the newspaper. General circulation in Davie County is required. and the clerk to the board has attached the affidavit showing publication in said paper on a date at least 10 days prior to today's hearing. I would ask that all who wish to come forward and comment at this public hearing do so by coming first to the podium, then stating your name and commenting. Mr. Chair, seeing no one come to comment, I would now turn the public hearing back over to you to close the public comment section of this hearing. Provide the board the opportunity to discuss among yourselves what, if any, action you wish to take with regards to this matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vogler. Okay, at this time, we'll declare the public hearing closed and turn it over to the board. Does anyone have any comments or anybody entertain a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. That is approved. Thank you. Okay, we have a second public hearing. Ms. Litz.
This is the second downzoning request for the evening. Donald Cranfield owns 17.8 acres at 2514 US Highway 601 North. Of that 17 acres, 1.4 acres is zoned Highway Business Special Conditions. That zoning was changed with the conditions in 1996. His request is to remove that commercial zoning, so the entire property is zoned RA. Currently, the house or the property features a house on the RA side and a storage building, shop building on the highway business side. The land use plan shows this as rural residential and a secondary growth area. This is a duly advertised public hearing. We have not received any calls, comments, or concerns about this property. Action before this board is approved. I will not read it again. It's the same. Deny or defer.
Thank you. All right. Again, this is a public hearing, so Mr. Vogler.
Mr. Chairman, as announced this day and the hour of the public hearing pursuant to Chapter 153A of the North Carolina General Statutes and pursuant to Section 153.251 of the Davie County Code of Ordinance. This board is conducting a public hearing on Donald Gray Cranfield's request to rezone approximately 1.4 acre tract of land from Highway Business Special Conditions, HBS, to Residential Agricultural, RA. Property is located at 2314 US Highway 601 North and described as tax map parcel F3 101.02. There's been due publication of notice of the public hearing in the newspaper. General circulation in Davie County is required, and the clerk to the board has attached an affidavit showing publication in said paper on a date at least 10 days prior to today's date. I would again ask each and everyone who wishes to comment at this public hearing come forward one at a time, state your full name at the podium, and then make your comments. Mr. Chair, seeing no one come forward, I would turn the public hearing back over to you as board chair, closing the public comment section of this public hearing. Provide the board the opportunity to discuss among yourselves what, if any, action you wish to take with regards to this rezoning request.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will declare the public hearing closed. Comments or entertain a motion to approve or not?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Do I have any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, raise your hand. That is approved. All right. Thank you, Ms. Litz. All right. Next, we have a couple proclamations, and I'll call on John Eller, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have two proclamations tonight, and I'll read our first. The first is to acknowledge Older Americans Month for this month, and we appreciate all of our aging planning committee folks being here tonight. It's only fitting that we issue this proclamation in addition to the plan that you're going to hear tonight. So with that, I'd like to read this proclamation, and then I'll issue that to Ms. Shusky on behalf of our senior services area. Whereas Davie County includes a growing number of older adults who enrich our community through their diverse life experiences, and whereas Davie County is committed to strengthening our community by connecting with and supporting older adults, their families, and caregivers, and acknowledging their many valuable contributions to society, and whereas Davie County recognizes the importance of bringing together all generations and engaging in activities that promote physical, mental, and emotional well-being for the benefit of all, and whereas Davie County Senior Services can enhance the lives of older Americans in our community by providing opportunities to connect with friends, family, and local services and resources, create through activities that promote learning, health, and personal enrichment, and contribute time, talent, and life experience to benefit others. Now, therefore, we, the Davie County staff, and you, the Board of Commissioners, do hereby proclaim May 2019 to be Older Americans Month, and we urge every resident to take time during this month to recognize older adults and the people who serve them as essential and valuable members of our community, issued this day by our chairman and our board. So, Ms. Shusky, if you'd come forward. I do want to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, to note the great work that's happening here. The month of May, there's so many volunteer activities occurring. Many of you know about this. Many citizens in our community may know about it as well. But if you do not, for whatever reason, please see Ms. Shusky. She'll be happy to tell you all the great ways you can get engaged in supporting our senior services in Davie County. So thank you. I look forward to hearing the aging plan here shortly. Mr. Chairman, in addition to that, we also have a proclamation that's coming up as May 19th through the 25th is the National Public Works Week. And so I'll read the proclamation and then ask Mr. Lambert to come up. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of our people of Davie County. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services cannot be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals at all levels of government and the private sector are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our nation's water supply, water treatment, solid waste systems, and other structures and facilities essential for our citizens. And whereas it's in the public interest for citizens to understand the importance of public works and public work programs in their respective communities, and whereas the year 2019 marks the 59th Annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association. Now, therefore, it be resolved by the Davie County Board of Commissioners to proclaim the week of May 19th through the 25th as National Public Works Week to pay tribute to our public works professionals and recognize the substantial contributions they make in protecting our health, safety, and quality of life, dated this date by the Davie County Board of Commissioners. So, Mr. Lambert, if you would come up. And while he is, I want to thank not only our county staff, but our town staff and what they do to support and partner with us in our public works area. So, Mr. Lambert, on behalf of so many of us, thank you for the work that you do and your staff.
All right. Next, we will move on to, we have a couple presentations. The aging plan for Davie County, and looking forward to hearing about that. So I'll ask Ms. Shusky to come up and present that, please.
Thank you. I've also asked Brandy Patty, our Assistant Director, to join me tonight in presenting this plan. So this plan tonight represents a 9-month effort of many different folks, and we have a lot of them here tonight. So we are very pleased to present for your consideration the aging plan for Davie County. This is intended to provide a framework for aging in Davie County over the next 5 years. And it is definitely a collaborative effort among many different citizens, nonprofits, government agencies, businesses, and service providers. And many of those folks who are involved are here tonight. So I would ask you all to stand so that you can be recognized. So all in all, probably 60 or so folks had a hand in the creation of this plan, not including all the public input that we got. So we actually came up with 12 different goals for groups and organizations in our county to strive toward as it relates to aging. And the plan itself contains 98 specific strategies that we think will make an impact on aging in our county. And those strategies are detailed out in your plan, which you all have the complete copy of. So tonight, obviously, we won't go into all of those. We'll just provide kind of a high-level overview of those. So why do we even need this plan? Well, obviously, The older population is growing significantly here in Davie County. So Brandy will talk about some of the demographics for us.
So Davie County is aging. So already the number of people in Davie County under the age of 18 is less than the number of people aged 60 years and older. So by year 2037, Davie's percent of people 60 and older will be higher than the state's percentage. So Davie County's older population is expected to grow at a rate of 49% over the next 20 years. Also in Davie County, we've seen a decline in birth rates over the last 50 years. So that means that a lot of older adults don't have children or won't have children in the future to take care of them. So additionally, it means that there are fewer working age people in the general workforce available to fill the jobs of caregiving for older adults. So these demographics speak the importance of planning for our future.
All right, so I'll speak a little bit to the process of how we created the plan. Obviously, Senior Services did take the lead on this process. We conducted personal interviews with 14 different key stakeholders in our county. We also did surveys over a period of a month and a half, and we did these both online and through paper surveys. And we held 6 focus groups, which we called community conversations, and we held those in 6 different areas around the county in order to gather public input. Once all that needs assessment process was gathered, there was a steering committee that was formed, and that was made up of representatives from our advisory council at Senior Services, as well as the Davie County Aging Services Planning Committee. And that committee met to assess, streamline, and prioritize all of the areas of focus. There were 5 areas of focus that were chosen, and the steering committee then secured community volunteers in order to serve in work groups for each area of focus. And these work groups met over a period of 3 months, and their job was to develop goals, objectives, and strategies for each area. Once the work groups were complete, there was a smaller team that was compiled, and they convened over the next month to gather all the information into one master plan. So our first area of focus was communication strategy, and obviously communication transcends all the focus areas. If people don't know about the programs and the services that are offered, then we may as well really not even have them. So this group focused on enhancing what we already had, utilizing new ideas and technology, and creating a common vision among many organizations. The goals in this group focused on coordination among many organizations in order to avoid duplication of effort. So we discussed things such as joint newsletters, regular radio and TV spots that were shared among many organizations, and the use of marketing videos. We also wanted to ensure that communication channels can adapt to emerging technologies. So we discussed things like working with students and interns to be sure that the communication platforms were user-friendly and also adaptable to change of technology in the future. We wanted to identify and enhance resources that were already in place. So things such as Senior Services Resource Guide, making sure that that is updated. Identifying a group of liaisons or ambassadors to be able to help direct people to services, and then also promoting existing things such as informational networks like United Way's 211 program. And finally, we wanted to enhance existing infrastructure, so we want to seek out ways to create marketing, either person or team, to be able to ensure that marketing is an intentional and effective effort. We also would like to identify a group to serve the collective impact of service providers in our community events. So if an organization goes to, say, a health fair, they're not just representing one agency, but the collective whole. And then also enhancing volunteer coordination around the county with perhaps the use of a volunteer coordinator. And obviously volunteers were integral in every area of focus that we came up with, so this volunteer coordinator really became a very important piece of that.
So the next work group was health. The health work group recognized the fact that prevention, accessibility, and social opportunities were key components to having good health and maintaining good health. So some of the goals and objective for the health group was focused on providing activities and services that promote healthy living, such as screenings, suicide prevention, and health education. Next, we talked about increasing accessibility and availability of existing healthcare opportunities, such as the PACE program, support groups, family caregiver support groups, and a more coordinated effort for welfare checks in the community for our older adults. And lastly, advocating for new resources that help maintain and improve health, such as an adult health clinic in the county, implementing Project Lifesaver, and investigating a community paramedics program.
Our third area of focus was transportation, and obviously transportation is a key component to allow our citizens to be able to successfully access any of the programs and services that are offered. So this work group focused on things such as awareness of existing services, things like increased marketing efforts of the available options, and specifically increased awareness of the circulator route that's available in Moxville. The group had a lot of ideas of some what we think are effective ways to perhaps increase ridership on that program. And then also to improve and enhance existing services in order to make transportation more accessible and easier to use. We talked about things such as working with medical professionals to schedule appointments that correspond more with Wabetty's transportation schedule, and simply just simplifying the reservation process that is currently in existence.
So the next area that we focused on was housing. So housing is one of the most challenging areas to focus on for our work group. An effective plan will empower older adults to remain independent and age in the place of their choice. So some of the objectives that we chose were the group decided early on that we couldn't solve all the housing problems in the county. So instead they focused on increasing awareness on housing issues. And we can do that by encouraging housing to be the forefront in decisions made about economic development in the community and educating the public about housing issues. And one way we thought about doing that was ensuring that supportive services are in place to allow older adults to remain in their home. We could do that by expanding and improving access to home repair volunteers and programs, and expanding supportive services that will enable people to remain in their own home, such as home health, respite, and Meals on Wheels.
And then our final work group and area of focus was financial well-being. And of course, this is simply not just about having more money. Financial well-being starts very early on, and it involves a multitude of different issues. So some of the things we focused on was increased education on financial matters, and the education component was very integral in most of the various work groups. But as far as financial, we talked about general seminars and adapting curriculum to the entire community. So places like schools, senior center, senior housing, churches, that sort of thing. Then we wanted to focus on specific topics such as avoiding overpayment of medical bills using our SHIP program, addressing some food insecurity by making food assistance programs, more knowledge about those things through our Meals on Wheels and Congregate Lunch program. And then finally, we wanted to increase the opportunities for older adults to supplement their income if they so chose. So things such as job fairs and increased promotion and participation in the community employment program for older adults. And then to keep their income safe from scams. So we had some ideas such as some education, of course, and then specific ideas and strategies such as a solicitation license process. So those were the 5 areas of focus that we chose. The next step, our hope is tonight that you will formally adopt this plan. And in doing so, you're indicating that you agree with the group that has worked, that this is the direction the county as a whole should be headed in order to make positive impacts on aging. So we're not here tonight to ask you specifically for any funding. However, it is our hope that as you make funding decisions in the future, you will keep these things in mind as areas that need to be looked at. And then really that's just the beginning of the process. This plan is meant to be a living document, Although the plan is a 5-year plan, we will continue to work on it throughout that 5 years. The plan is for the work groups to meet quarterly or as needed that first year. And we will discuss the goals, we'll evaluate the progress in meeting those goals, and then we'll revise those whenever necessary. And then we anticipate in years 2 through 5 meeting semi-annually to continue to monitor the progress and refine goals and update the plan. So what's important to note is this is not a plan for senior services. Obviously, senior services cannot accomplish all 98 strategies that we have outlined in these in this plan, but the success of the plan is going to depend on continued collaboration and community involvement over the next 5 years. So our plan is to present to various community groups. So anywhere basically we can get an audience, we would love to come out and present. We will have printed copies of the plan. They're at the printer currently, so those will be available next week for anyone who's interested. And it'll be posted on our website and various other websites as well. So our hope is that in hearing and reading about some of these plans that we have, these strategies that we have determined, that various groups and organizations will sort of step up to the plate and be willing to help us to achieve these goals in our county. Again, participation of a variety of community members and organizations is going to be critical to the success. And by working together, we hope we can build the capacity to support our aging population and ultimately improve our quality of life for all the residents here. So we'd love to answer any questions that you might have. We've got lots of folks in the audience that might can know the answers if we don't.
I have a question about the transportation. Obviously, with the population getting older, how much, you got any idea how many more miles use transportation this year over last? Or is it increasing, I guess, as a broader question?
So that I do not know. Obviously, Wabeti does all of the transportation in our county. I know that they did take, the circulator route was a new initiative. It's been about 1.5 years, I think, now. The veterans route was a new initiative that they formed this past year. And I know that while ridership has been, I'm not sure how the veterans route is doing. I haven't heard a lot of feedback on that. And they do have some ridership on the circulator route, but it's just not really it's not representative, I think, of the need that's out there. I think there are certainly ways that can be enhanced. And that was, we spent a lot of time in that work group coming up with some strategies of how to enhance that ridership. So I don't have the numbers, unfortunately, because that's not data that we keep. But I know the need is out there. The need's always been out there. We've been talking about transportation for 23 years since I've been here, so I know that transportation is always going to be a need.
May I add?
Yes.
My name is Allison Brown, and I'm the chairman of
Come forward.
My name is Allison Brown, and I'm the chairman of the Aging Services Planning Committee. And the funding that we received through the Home and Community Care Block Grant for transportation, if I remember correctly, there are 2 buckets. One is for medical transportation, and one is for general transportation. And one runs around $7,000 a year, and one seems that it's about $5,000 a year. And I apologize that I don't have that information in front of me, but they always spend that money very early into the year, and they always use other funding from other grant sources to try to keep up with it. But they're not able to meet the demand due to the limitations on the funding.
Okay, thank you.
The general transportation is typically limited to bringing folks into our lunch program, and maybe some very limited grocery store visits, that sort of thing. And the medical transportation, I believe they limit to twice a month, or they were at one time limiting to twice a month for the medical transportation. What other questions?
I don't really have a question, but I want to just add something to what you said. I really enjoyed the time that I spent in the committee we worked on the transportation and mobility. We even rode the circulator to see if we could decide why it wasn't being used and how we could help that. And it really is going to take a whole community involvement to solve these problems that we've come up with during all this process. And I just thought it was great. We had great conversations in our committee, and I think that's what it's going to take, is just bringing back the awareness. And Kim, thank you, and Brandy and all the staff for all that you've done during this process. I think a lot of it's just a matter of stopping and get off the world for a minute and look around us and see what we can do to make our community better.
And this process has really, the plan itself obviously is important, but the process has really been impactful because it has brought together a lot of different organizations and agencies that maybe have never sat around the table together. So it's opened up a lot of conversations and a lot of new networks. So it's been, I think it's been a very successful endeavor.
And we found out that a lot of the programs, they're in place, and we think they're great just because we put them in place, but they're not great if nobody knows how to use them. So it was a great experience for me, so I want to thank you.
Okay, anybody have any more questions for Ms. Patty or Ms. Shusky? I want to thank all the 60-plus people that was involved. It's obviously been a lot of work, and did some great work, so thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so at this time, we'll entertain a motion to approve plan as presented.
I make that motion, Mr. Chairman, and I would just say this. In my brief period of time down at Senior Services, the services that are offered to the community are amazing. I don't even know how to describe it. I will say this. I sit on the YVETI board, too, and their commitment to that, to the service here is they're going to figure out how to make this thing work. And if we all work together, I think we can do that in terms of the transportation. But I just encourage Davie County to come out and just see what is available to seniors. I'm glad Gary Snow's here today. He babysat me when I was younger. But I am one now. I am a senior now, and so it's exciting to see what's going on down there, and it's amazing for our community. I make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the aging plan for Davie County as presented, raise your hand. That passes. Thank you. I would just piggyback on what Mr. Jones said. There's a lot of activity at the Senior Center and on a daily basis, and there's lots of opportunities this month. So volunteer, there's always opportunities, but this month there's multiple opportunities, so please take advantage of that. All right. Next we have a presentation on the capital improvement plan, and I know we, John, are you going to kick that off?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll start, Mr. Chairman, and I do know some of our seniors and our planning group members had said they may need to leave after this. If y'all want to stay, we welcome you to stay, but didn't want you to feel like you had to. So thank you again. I know that we have a couple of new commissioners on the board, and last year many of you remember Mitch coming to present to us with Davenport to help us think through our capital improvement plan. And in thinking about how we plan these things out, it truly is a strategic plan. Obviously, we have to have the finances to do what we need to do, and we need to do it, being good stewards of our tax-paying dollars. And so last year you saw our strategic plan roll out, and then also our capital improvement plan. And this is kind of to tell you where we are 1 year later and what the plans are and what the priorities are. So Ms. West is going to kind of kick off some analysis we've done over the past year, and then Mitch will come up and kind of tell you how we're doing on that regard and our ability to do some of these things. But again, these are placeholders as we go into the budget season to really know how to further our space needs study plan. About a year ago, You may recall we engaged with Mosley, and Mosley came and did a facility space needs study. They presented to the board at that time. They made some recommendations on some things we needed to do and some progression to do that, but they were clear with us that it's hard to move on some of these items without finding space for other people because it was a domino effect. We had to vacate space to renovate space. And so you'll hear some of that as Ms. West goes through her presentation, and then we'll turn it over to our friend from Davenport to talk to you about some of the details with that. We've also done some cost-benefit analysis on some of our facilities about what buying would be or what leasing would be or what building would be, and looking at those different options with some of our facilities. That facility space needs study was, I think 500 and some pages. So we weren't going to go through that whole document again, obviously. So what you're seeing tonight is an executive summary and a follow-up to what we presented before, some at your work session earlier this year, and some of the questions we asked you and priorities that you gave us. And that's kind of led us to today to do this presentation. So I'll turn it over to Ms. West to kind of walk us through some of the analysis we've done.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to present to you our annual refresh of the General Fund Capital Improvement Plan. This is what we do is we develop a very extensive 5-year plan for the next 5 years. And we also, it's hard to see on this slide, and I apologize, there's a lot of information crammed on here. Down at the bottom we have a listing of some things that we know on the 6 to 10 year horizon. So we wanted to point that out as well. There are many projects we have here, and I'll just highlight, I'll go through them briefly. The park phase 1 is just to complete the phase 1 of the park master plan. The voting equipment has been, as I understand it, delayed until at least November 2019. So that was scheduled for the current fiscal year. That's this column right here. The first column is this current fiscal year, and then the next 5 fiscal years are detailed here for a 6-year total. That, as I understand it, there's also talk of it being delayed a little bit further than November of 2019, so just keep that in mind. Our next project is the CAD Viper radio project. So over the next 5 years, we plan to replace the CAD system, work on radio microwave project and the radio console upgrade, as well as provide replacement radios. If you recall, a few years ago, we bought radios for fire and other public safety people. So this 5-year plan includes replacing some of those radios. We have plans for the community college to submit a master plan for their CIP request for the $4 million. And I'm going to skip down a few and then talk about the admin building next. So this 5-year plan is to replace the roof on this building, the HVAC, upgrade the bathrooms, and do some lighting upgrades. And the courthouse is for bathroom upgrades and security doors, as well as some other things that are included in the space study implementation line. And for the library, we like to create a new space designated for teens for the county. And for parking lots, we have the courthouse, the admin building, and the Brock, and then the health, the annex, and the former hospital parking lots to be repaved. For the Brock upgrades, that includes lighting and flooring. And then the sheriff upgrades are for network switches, servers, and storage. And then during the Mosley study, there were several large projects that were identified. One of them being the detention center. So the detention center is included in this 5-year plan. So in 21 and 22, those are for planning and design, and we'll begin in construction in the fiscal year 2023. So I want to go back and talk for a moment about the space study implementation. We had a lot of needs identified when we did the space study. Before you tonight is a colorful flow chart. So this kind of is the space study in a very intricate, detailed flow chart. But as Mr. Eller said, a few dominoes have to fall for the rest of it to happen. So for in the 5-year plan included on the space study implementation line. That's going to include the Brock Auditorium and some senior center upgrades, renovation of the DSS Annex and the health building, and some changes for the DSS building and the courthouse. So it also includes some storefront. So we would like to find a storefront to house Health and Human Services as well as the Sheriff's Office. So those are lines 6 and 7 on the schedule. So these dollars include not only the tenant upfits for that potential building, but also the lease payments. We did a bit of an analysis because in the Mosley study, they pointed out that for a new Health and Human Services building, it would cost over $14 million to construct it as a new facility. And also they identified a sheriff's office or law enforcement center at $8.5 million. That was back in 2017 when we got the information from Mosley Architects. If we were to take those dollars and say, you know, the cost of construction escalates every year, so we've made some assumptions there, taken these 2017 dollars of the 2.25 million and tried to translate them into, 2020, that would be ambitious to construct 2 huge new facilities. But that cost would go from $22.5 million to about $30 million. And as you can see, we kind of went out a few years. It's going to get more and more expensive the more we wait to do this. You know, we had a lot of pressures in the Mosley study identified, so we tried to find a solution to the issues of needing some new buildings. So we compared that to potentially leasing some space and the $2.5 million for the sheriff's office, and that includes all the sheriff's employees. That would put them all in one location, everyone except the detention center. That would be really nice, as well as all of Health and Human Services except for, I think, the senior center. Plus the potential lease payments for the space to get a total of $12.2 million over a potential 30-year lease. So we compared that $12.2 million versus the cost to construct those 2 facilities in the 2020, so that's that $30 million right here, for a savings of $17.7 million. Well, it would be really hard at this point for us to construct and open a facility in 2020. So again, if we looked at it to construct it and open it in 2023, if we decided to go the lease with the upfit options, we would be saving $27.6 million. So just something to think about. So again, we have the 5-year plan. Mitch is going to go through a bit of the model that we go through, that we put all the funds into. These are the uses of funds for the projects. He's going to go through some of the funding sources. And just as a programming note, next month at the June meeting, we'll be talking a bit about the Public Utilities Capital Improvement Plan. Not much has changed, but we wanted to do that, kind of refresh that in conjunction with the annual budget process. So does anybody have any questions about any of the project details? I know that's kind of a high-level overview, but all the explanations were on that second very detailed page. I tried not to read it, but.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the assumptions behind the model that we ran is, there are 2 things to point out. One is all of you who have friends or customers in your business who are in the building services industry, you know, prices have escalated exponentially. And so we've got an escalation rate built in on typically what we're seeing with some of our projects now. The other should be noted is that we also were trying to think, how do we manage what we need based on what the facility space needs study told us until the high school debt is paid off. So this gets us a way to have an immediate need met until that debt is paid off in the very far future for then a decision to be made in the long term. The other thing that we started out when we got the Mosley study back, and many of you may remember this, it was how are we going to do all this? I mean, it would take us, I think we estimated 20 to 25 years to even be able to do the complete list of items that they gave us. If we do this, that shortens exponentially. We're thinking maybe 5 to 7 years. Many of the items in the space needs study will be accomplished. Make no doubt, though, our number one item as far as high cost and need, as Robin said, is the detention center. We know that that's a priority need. The problem is, and you'll hear this from Mitch when he comes up, when we incur that debt matters. And that's why we've ran the financial model to know when the right year is to do that. So we're trying to take steps now that will pay off later. These are just based on some analysis we've done. Obviously, these priorities are yours, so we can change them however we need to. But we do need to have this really as a strategic, comprehensive plan, almost a marker, if you will, to help us get where we need to be over the next 5 years. So with that, to Ms. West's point, if we have any questions, we'd love to answer them if we can. If not, we'll get you more information after tonight.
Right, and one other thing I wanted to point out is, on the flow chart, the dominoes that are first to fall need to be the storefronts for HHS and the sheriff's office. So I don't know if that was clear, but hopefully once you look at the flow chart and see, that's kind of the center of the things that, have to happen for other people to move in different spaces.
We're going to take all the questions at the end.
That'll be fine. Mm-hmm.
We gave up a long time ago trying to pronounce Mitch's last
Yes,
name.
so now we have a Mitch from Davenport.
Yes. And he will be doing the executive summary. Mitch could, this model can go on and on and on. There's a lot of information here, but he wants to hit the high notes for you tonight.
And for the record, it's Mitch Pergulio with Davenport and Company. And I know a couple of new faces this year. So we serve as the county's financial advisor in assisting with this capital planning aspect and any other number of planning aspects along the way, as well as assist the county through the debt issuance process. So tonight, wanted to hit the highlights, a refresher for some of you, and maybe an introduction to our capital planning model. We're happy to come back and go through as much detail as you'd like, but as John said, Mr. Eller said, I'm going to hit the highlights tonight. Stop me along the way if you have questions or if I'm moving too quickly. I'm happy to dig in as deep as you all would like to. But let's see, Rob, how do I do this? I got it. All right, so starting out, just real quick, I'll tell you what's coming is I'm going to give you an overview of your current credit ratings and introduce some peer comparatives. We're going to look at your key debt ratios that you have financial policies on. These are policies that you've adopted to help manage your debt profile as part of the CIP process. And we'll benchmark that to other peer counties in North Carolina and nationally to give you some perspective on how you stack up. Going to give you a quick overview of your existing debt profile, where you are related to your financial policies, and then quick summary of the plan that you all developed beginning back in 2015 before the high school bond issuance, and then have revised along the way, setting aside resources to dedicate towards capital in this CIP so that you can accomplish projects that you choose to. And then we'll look at the CIP that Ms. West laid out and analyze what that looks like when we look at potential funding sources, how that impacts your debt policies, and then how that stacks up to the revenues and cash flow you all have set aside as part of the plan. So quickly on page 4, and you all have the hard copies in front of you because some of these numbers do get a little small. On page 4, the county has a very good credit rating. AA2 by Moody's Investor Service, and back in October, upgraded to AA+ by Standard & Poor's. So from Moody's, you are 2 steps away from the highest credit rating you could possibly have at AAA. And from S&P, you are 1 step away from that highest rating at AAA. So you have very good credit ratings, which means you have access to the credit markets. It's reasonable for you to assume that you can access the credit markets to assist in funding your CIP. So those credit ratings are a testament to the management that you all have. The way you have managed yourselves financially over the years has set you up with this very good credit rating, providing access to the markets. We do have for you, I'm not going to go through them tonight, but you have a summary of the most recent rating reports from October of 18. I think they're always nice, provide some good perspective on how others outside see you and look at your financial and demographic profiles. So the full reports are in the back of the presentation. There's a summary of Moody's here on page 5, and S&P is on page 6. Okay? And last thing I'll say about ratings, why do we care about credit ratings? Well, credit ratings, whether you're going to the public markets to issue things like we did for the GO bonds, you sell those in the public markets, or whether you're going to a bank for a direct bank loan financing like we've also done in recent years, your credit is going to be analyzed, and that credit is going to determine the interest rate you receive on your financing. That interest rate ultimately flows into the model and decides whether projects are affordable or not. So it's all intertwined. As we look at the CIP process, we evaluate funding of the CIP, we want to keep our credit profile in mind, because if we get away, if we do things that perhaps impact our credit profile negatively, that could impact the cash flows that flow through the model. So that's a little bit of perspective on how all of this kind of comes together in one cohesive plan. All right, so starting out looking at your existing debt profile, 68.5, roughly $68.5 million of principal or par amount outstanding. The bulk of that is the GO bonds, $55.7 million. Again, the bulk of that is the high school and the recent Parks bond issue that you all did last year. You do have some installment financings outstanding, about $9.3 million. For those of you who we haven't had the conversation previously, I'm sure you're aware, general obligation bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the county's taxing power. So that is an unlimited pledge of your taxing power. Installment financing contracts are secured by an asset. So if you finance a facility, you put a mortgage on the facility and you pledge that. It is not backed by the full faith and credit of the county's taxing power. So slight difference. And then there are some other lease type obligations that you have totaling $3.4 million. So that's what makes up the $68.5 million outstanding. As I mentioned earlier, you have a series of financial policy guidelines that establish targets for debt ratios. The first debt ratio that we look at, and I'm going to introduce it here, is the 10-year payout ratio. The 10-year payout ratio is a measure of the percentage of principal outstanding that you repay over the first 10 years. So you all have, $55 million, or excuse me, $68.5 million of principal outstanding. You're going to repay almost 3/4 of that over the next 10 years. It's a very good payout ratio. You're issuing debt, but you're retiring it in a rapid fashion, responsibly. And like John was saying, kind of waiting for some of the larger debt issuances like the high school to roll off so you can take on other future projects. Well, you're retiring that debt quickly relatively to others. And so, that debt's going to be paid off, I think it's fiscal 31 or 32. So, about 10, 12 years from now, you'll have an opportunity to replace that with other larger projects. So this 10-year payout ratio, again, it's a measure of how quickly you're repaying your principal. A little more detail on that on page 10. You can see it graphically. Like I said, you're repaying about 3/4 of your debt, 75% right now. That's going to jump to 80% in fiscal year 2020 and grow to basically almost 100% within the next 5 years. So within 15 years, you're going to paid off almost all of your debt outstanding. You have adopted a policy for this. You've set a minimum target of 55%, so a target not to go below 55% 10-year payout ratio, well above that right now, in very good shape. And on the right-hand side of the page, here's where we're introducing our first peer comparative. And I'll walk you through this one. You're going to see a couple more of these. They're all set up the same. Davie County, as of 2019, fiscal 19, is up top in the gold bar. That's your 75% in fiscal 19. The light green bars are nationally rated counties. So all counties that are rated nationally, AAA at the top, that's the very highest rating. AA, which is the next level of rating category, you fall into that category. And then AA1, which is one step above you, is the next bar, and then AA2 is right below that, the third highest category. That's the category that you fall into for Moody's, AA2 nationally. And then we have the same categories, AAA, AA1, and AA2, but for North Carolina counties only. And what you see is at 75%, you stack up very nicely to all of these medians, kind of right in line and slightly above the North Carolina AA1 median. So in very good shape here on the 10-year payout ratio. The second key debt ratio that you have an adopted financial policy on is debt to assessed value. In fiscal year 19, your debt outstanding represented approximately 1.5% of your total tax base, your total assessed value. This is a measure that rating agencies look at, that creditors look at when assessing your debt burden outstanding. At 1.5%, you are in good shape. It's well below your targeted not to exceed policy or target maximum policy of 2.5%. So you got about 1% to go within this policy. And when we look at you compared to the peers, 1.5% is well above the national median. But let me explain that. You lose a little bit of comparability here when we're looking at this measure nationally, because there's a lot of states, such as South Carolina, that have independent school districts. And those independent school districts have their own taxing power. They issue their own debt to fund school capital projects. It does not show up on the books of the county. Obviously, here in North Carolina, you all are responsible for providing school facilities. You issue the debt for those school facilities, so it shows up on your books. So that's why it's very common to see this type of thing where North Carolina is much higher than the national averages, because you all have different responsibilities than others do. When we look at the North Carolina medians, again, slightly above the North Carolina medians, here, those tend to fall around between the 1 and 1.25% basis. But we are looking at the medians here. So the median is the midpoint of all the data. When we look, and we've got this information for you in the green box over to the right, when we look at the range, for North Carolina AA1s, the maximum is 2.3%. And North Carolina AA2s, which is the category you're in, the maximum is 2.9%. So at 1.5%, you're right there, well within that range, well below the maximum, just slightly above the median. So in good shape here on this debt to assessed value, again, well below your policy. And when we look at what the rating agencies have to say about debt to assessed value, Moody's says under their methodology, you would be in their strong category. So their second highest category of debt outstanding. At your 1.5%, you fall below the maximum of that category of 175. So all that's to say you're in very good shape on this debt policy. Okay? The next one is debt service to expenditures. This is a measure of your annual debt service as a percentage of your ongoing governmental budget. In our calculations, we exclude capital expenditures, so we're only looking at the ongoing operating budget, ongoing governmental operating budget. And for you all, in 2019, we're estimating at about 13.7% debt service as a percentage of expenditures. You have an adopted financial policy of a target maximum of 15%. You all are below that policy now, but obviously, at 13.7%, this is the one where you're closest to that policy level. This one is the one that could be a limiting factor for you moving forward. When we compare you to the peers on the right-hand side of the page, again, above the national medians, which we would expect, below the North Carolina AAA median, and slightly above the North Carolina AA1 and AA2 medians. When we look at the maximum of this range, though, you look at the AA1s at 19.5%. Y'all are at roughly 13.7%. So well below that maximum. Again, well within a reasonable range on this ratio. And one thing I'd point out on this ratio is it kind of goes hand in hand with the payout ratio. The easiest way to improve your debt service to expenditure ratio is to lower your debt service payment, which means to stretch it out for a longer period of time. The longer you amortize a loan, the lower your annual payment's going to be, but the higher your total interest will be over time. Lower annual payment translates into lower debt service to expenditures, but you're paying back less principal, so your 10-year payout ratio is lower, which is a weaker 10-year payout ratio. You all, back in 2015, when doing the high school bonds, decided to look at a hybrid approach where you did a little bit of structuring on the debt service to allow your tax base to grow into it, but you shortened the term of the loan. So shortening that term of the loan helped with the 10-year payout ratio and improving that payout ratio. But here in the near term, it did increase a little bit of the debt service here for the debt service to expenditures policy. So just a little bit of background on the way that the payout ratio and this debt service to expenditures ratio have evolved and kind of play into one another. Okay? So I know I talked for a long time on those. I could have summarized it here in about less than 30 seconds and say you're in very good shape on your debt ratios. You're well below your policies. You're in a very reasonable range compared to your peer medians. And we would say you have capacity to issue additional debt under these ratios. It is reasonable for you to be considering or to consider debt as a funding source for your CIP, given where you stack up compared to these ratios. The flip side of that, or the other piece of that, is affordability. Reasonable, you have capacity. It's reasonable for you to be considering it, but can you afford it? And that's the next piece that I want to talk about. And this is one of the large Excel models, and I won't walk through it in great detail tonight. Again, I'm happy to come back. But what I would say is you all have done a very nice job of establishing a plan and following that plan to create some affordability for a CIP. Again, goes back to 2015 before the high school bonds were issued. You locked in the property tax at that point that you were dedicating towards debt service. You've continued to bring that forward every year as part of the budget process. You implemented a new property tax increase back in 2015 and then improved that or did the second piece of that last year with the Geo Park issuance. So you've got both you locked in your existing property tax for debt service and capital back in 2015, and you added to it as approved by the GO bonds since then. You've also come up with a very good vehicle replacement program. We're in fiscal year 2020, entering the final year of that vehicle replacement program of setting aside funding to create a level annual funding amount for vehicles. That's built into the model. You instituted back in 2017 a general fund contribution for pay-as-you-go capital towards the CIP. You've carried that forward for 3 years in a row now. that was another big step into making an affordable CIP. And then there's a couple other miscellaneous revenue sources that you've continued to carry forward and will presumably continue to carry those forward over time. What that means is that you have affordability to be considering capital projects. And this is one of the reasons I printed it for you, not that it's much bigger on the page, but as you get your magnifying glass out later, I'll tell you what to look for. Columns B through H are the debt service and capital requirements. Columns I through Q are those revenues available for capital and debt service. And then column R is the comparison or the surplus deficit. It's column Q, the revenues available, and column H, the debt service and capital funding requirements. And based upon your existing budget and your existing debt service requirements, you have affordability going forward. The question is that affordability going to be enough to cover the CIP that you all are considering this evening, as Mr. Eller and Ms. West have laid out? Which is what we're going to look at next here on page 16. So the top half of this chart is the $35.5 million of projects that Ms. West walked you through. The bottom, that's the uses of funds. The bottom half of the chart is the sources of funds that we've been working with staff to develop. We've been working with staff to develop a plan that kind of balances your debt ratios, your debt affordability, and the projects to try and accomplish all of this within the cash flows available. And so what we're looking at is funding line 10, about $25 million in debt over the next 5 years. You're paying off, again, you're paying off your debt quickly, so not all of this is new additive debt on top of the $68.5 million. You're going to retire a good portion of the $68.5 million over the next 5 years. Some of this is just replacing that. But looking at issuing debt in fiscal year 2020 and 2021, and that's associated largely with the upfits for the sheriff's lease and the HHS building lease. And then out in 2023, where we have the law enforcement center financing, we're looking at another debt financing in that year to fund largely the law enforcement center and perhaps go towards some additional space needs implementation and perhaps a little bit of the Davie County College 4-year plan. We do have about $8.6 million of pay-as-you-go capital in this financing, in this program. So when we look at the ratio of debt funding and pay-as-you-go funding, that's at a very good level. A lot of our clients have policies that state they want to do at least 10% pay-as-you-go capital funding over a 5-year period of time. You're doing well above that. So I think this is a good mix of both debt and pay-as-you-go capital funding. It also includes, or also factored into this, not shown, but factored into this, is the lease that you would enter into for the sheriff's office and the DHHS building. Okay? So when we layer in the debt that we're assuming here on page 17, you can see how your debt profile changes over time. The dark green in the graph, top left is the debt service. The dark green is your existing debt service. And then we layer in the light green is the 2020 issuance. The light blue is the 21 issuance. And then the gold is the fiscal year 2023 issuance. That's the larger one associated with the law enforcement center. Over top, we are tracking this, is the vehicle debt that's assumed. You've instituted this 5-year plan. Fiscal year 20 is the last year of the plan, where you're going to do a rolling 5 years to replace vehicles, and your annual payment will remain the same on those. So we are tracking that as part of this plan as well. Over the life of the proposed issuances, we are assuming level principal, which is a very conservative structure. And over the life of the issuances, it's about $38.5 million of debt service to fund the $25.2 million of debt that we are issuing. We revisit your policies and your debt ratios on page 18. Your 10-year payout ratio remains well above your policy, in very good shape there. Debt to assessed value, you don't get much above 1.5%. So basically maintaining the same level where you're at right now, well below your policy. As I mentioned earlier, debt service to expenditures is the one that's the tightest at this point. There is about a 4 to 5 year period of time where you would be slightly above that 15% target policy. But what I would say to you is that this is what we're seeing most often with our clients these days. If you think back through the recession, there was a concerted effort, a thoughtful effort to maintain lower budgets to help weather through the recession. Well, and that was a very good thing, but what that means is you're starting with a lower expenditure base, which obviously plays into the debt service to expenditure policy. And then there was also an effort that said we're going to hold off on doing a lot of capital projects during this time as we're in the recession and coming out of the recession. Now what we've seen, like you all have with the space needs study, is there's a lot of folks out there where there's a built-up need for capital and people are starting to issue debt to fund that capital. And so for a lot of our clients, we are seeing this period of time, 4 to 5 years, of being slightly over this debt service to expenditure policy. Totally up to you all as a board on whether you're comfortable with that or not, obviously. But what I would say to you is, from a rating perspective, we've met with the rating agencies a number of times with clients who have been in this similar situation. And I would say it's been more of a positive conversation than anything else. And what's been positive about it is that there's a planning process in place. And the clients that we've met with the rating agencies with in this situation have been able to say, as part of this debt issuance, we're anticipating being above our debt service to expenditure policy. The board is aware of it. They've decided to make an exception, and they have asked us as staff to keep an eye on it, present to them annually or more often, and work to get back into compliance within a reasonable period of time. And that process, the fact that you all as a board are tracking this like you do at least annually, if not more often, and the fact that you're aware of it and could see it coming is more of a positive thing than the fact that you could be slightly above your policy. A lot of assumptions go into this as well. Timing of things impacts this. If projects do get delayed, that improves this. We see that with the voting machines right now. That's getting pushed out, so projects tend to get delayed. That happens. We have some conservative interest rates built in. To the extent your interest rates come in better, this policy would look better. And then we have some conservative growth rates for your operating budget. And to the extent that, the county grows faster, tax base grows faster, budget grows faster, then this ratio could be improved as well. So from our perspective, when we think about it from a credit markets perspective, no concerns when we see this level. You're slightly over for a short period of time. No concerns there from our perspective. Finally, we revisit the cash flows. And again, I know these numbers are very hard to say, but long story short is you can do this $35 million of capital without needing to come up with additional resources other than what you've already identified. We have laid in the pay-as-you-go capital. We have laid in the debt service that we're assuming for the debt issued under the sources of funds. We have added some operational savings that's anticipated as part of the law enforcement center, so that's helping a little bit. And so all of those things factor in, and we have basically maxed out our affordability here. We get to a minimum fund balance. I wrote it down on my book because I can't read it on the screen. A minimum fund balance in 2026 of about $12,000. So we are pulling it down using most of the capacity here, but then it rebuilds itself very quickly over time.
$12 million.
12,000. Capital reserve fund balance. I apologize. No. You're not your general fund balance. The fund balance in the CIP plan. I realize I would need to get out the door and start running if that was your general fund
Another
balance.
conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So that's the plan. That's the results of the CIP. You know, slightly over the debt service to expenditures policy, but not dramatically and not for a long period of time. And within the resources that have been identified, you can fund this CIP. It is kind of maxing out those revenues that you've identified, but you do have them. You do have enough revenue to fund the plan as it's been laid out. And as Mr. Eller said, it's a 5-year plan. It's a 5-year roadmap. But what we know is you're gonna adopt the 2020 budget. That's what's going to be locked in. Things are going to change. Things are going to evolve over time, and this gets revisited on a regular basis. And we'll update it along the way and keep you all posted. But you know, it's a reasonable plan at this point in time, is from our perspective. Happy to answer any questions.
I just had one quick question from a logistical standpoint. That the HHS upfit and the sheriff upfit, wouldn't those, based on kind of where you're looking to go, wouldn't they be within the same?
No, that is based on the specs that Mosley did in the space needs study, comparatively with how many staff you have, what kind of furniture, equipment, renovations you'd have. That would be for for approximately, I think, 30 plus thousand square feet for one, and the sheriff's office was about the same amount. So that's why those amounts are very similar.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about the fiscal year. You have them in 2 different fiscal
Correct.
years.
Half would be incurred to do the half of the storefront for sheriff's office to give us time to then move and do the other half.
Phase.
Yes,
Okay.
it's a
All right.
2-phase project,
Okay.
Commissioner Jones. Thank you.
Okay.
Is it still true that we will never be at AAA just given our size?
I think you never say never, but 30% of the rating for both Moody's and S&P is based upon economy, what they refer to as economy, which is, generally speaking, tax base size, tax base per capita, and median income. They both measure median income in different ways, but that makes up roughly 30% of your rating. And so here in the near term, you don't stack up great under those 3 metrics, and that's 30% of the rating. But as you continue to grow, as you continue to evolve, economic development efforts, I think there's a way forward depending upon how that evolves. But from what you can control, that 30%, which is economy, is not really under this board's direct control. You can put policies in place, you can work on economic development to try to grow the tax base, create, better earning jobs, but that's not an overnight process. 70% of the rating is within your control. It's management, it's how you budget, it's your fund balance levels, it is your financial operating performance, so your operating revenues cover your operating expenses, and it's your debt outstanding. And all of those things that you have direct control over, you all have done a great job of. And you've set yourself up, again, with AA2 and AA plus credit ratings. You're right there almost at the top. You've done, and I think the rating reflects the job that you all have done. But when you factor in that 30%, which is economy, that you can't take an action tonight to change that, that is your limiting factor at this point.
The Mosley study, what was the total? Does anyone remember the total price tag on that? I know there's a lot of things that's changed, what we're talking about tonight, but as far as how we're looking at it. But,
I don't have that amount in front of me. Mr. Chairman, do you recall? We will get that to you, though.
and I know we're looking at a 5-year plan, but I got that. But really, as I recall, the only thing that's not on here that goes beyond the 5 years, really, is the courthouse, as far as really big ticket items.
Correct. And what this does, because we're able to domino effect, if you will, we're able to allow our sheriff's deputies and some of our courthouse staff to find additional space elsewhere. Now we're freeing up capacity to tackle that courthouse project at some point in the future. The challenge has always been we have nowhere for people to go to do the courthouse renovation, and I know y'all have heard for a long time that's a need for additional court space from our court staff, but then also the detention center. Those are obviously two big projects. But once we tackle moving our some of the staff out of the courthouse into some of these other facilities, then we're able to start that effect to happen.
And you know, the closer or the further out you get in time, I'm looking at your existing debt profile, right? So you see the high school debt really starting to pay off significantly in 31 and 32, and it's gone in 33. I mean, by fiscal year 33, under your existing debt profile, you don't really have any debt outstanding. Now, that's evolving with the issuance of the law enforcement center, but you still have this large step down in your debt service budget out here in 31 and 32, and then again in fiscal year 33. So based upon the plan that you all have created to maintain those funding sources, that's going to be a significant opportunity here in about 10 years to be considering funding additional major projects should you choose to.
So, given that, it would be fair to say that the violation of the debt service to expenditures ratio that we're currently looking at probably wouldn't be an issue if we waited to 31 for the courthouse.
Yeah, and I don't think so. So when you look at this debt service to expenditures, that 2031 is that year where you
So more to the point, we would only be in violation 4 to 5 years.
That's right.
Okay.
And again, there's a lot of things that go into
Sure.
that. You may not end up being in violation of it. It's just we try to plan conservatively and want to show you,
It's a model.
want to show you what could happen and be prepared for it.
On page 18, the various, well, there's a couple places, but the debt ratios, there's the three of them that we look at and have a policy to deal with them. Is one of those trump the other, maybe, or not really?
No, sir, not really. They all kind of play hand in hand. I mean, the debt to assessed value is a pretty common measure of your debt burden, right? It's a debt is a percentage of tax base. It's what a lot of people look at. It used to be debt per capita, but people have evolved away from debt per capita into debt to assessed value, which is really more of a measure of your ability to repay the debt because it's your debt against your tax base. Your revenues, the bulk of your revenues are generated from your tax base. So that's an important one. And then the 10-year payout and debt service to expenditures, like I played earlier, kind of go hand in hand. If you focus on the debt service to expenditures policy and that's all you focus on, you may look at this and say, wow, we're a little bit above our debt service to expenditures policy. Is there anything we can do to stretch that debt out a little bit, lower our debt service payment in the earlier years and get through this period of time? And you could, not necessarily in North Carolina, but in other places, a lot of folks will end up backloading their debt to get around that. And then what happens is the 10-year payout ratio drops significantly. So those two, having those hand in hand, kind of provide a check and a balance for one another to say your annual payment is important. Obviously, a lower annual payment is better from an affordability standpoint, but being responsible and repaying your principal quickly is also very important, and you keep those two in mind together. So I think all of these in conjunction with one another work well as a kind of a unified debt policy. Again, it's more about the process. The process that we're having this conversation tonight, that you're asking questions and digging into the fact that we're projecting that we could be above this debt service to expenditure policy, or it could be the debt to assessed value policy, or below the 10-year payout ratio policy. That's, from our perspective, from the credit perspective, that's the important conversation. That you're considering these things when you're making a decision to fund a project, and you do so knowingly.
What escalation or on the space study implementation, the cost avoidance slide, what did you use for your escalation rate?
I was told it ranged from people in the construction industry currently from 8 to about 14%, so I used 10%.
Anybody else have any questions, comments? I have a final question for Mitch from Davenport. The Bergoglio crystal ball, what are y'all projecting as rates? I mean, as far as borrowing, are you seeing any? I mean,
So it's been really interesting over the last 12 to 18 months. A lot of volatility, but going back to really November of last year, we've seen a pretty steady decline in interest rates. The municipal market, there's been a lack of supply of bonds. So people are issuing less bonds comparatively to what we have historically. At the same time, there's a lot of money going into municipal bond funds, which has increased the demand side to purchase municipal bonds. So all of that has helped really push rates low in the municipal market environment, or in the municipal market. You know, other things, the municipal market tends to benefit from a flight to quality. So the uncertainty in the world with North Korea and the China trade deal and the Brexit, all of that has been really helping to keep municipal rates low. Obviously, the Fed has changed their tune over the last 3 months, 5 months. So projecting short-term interest rates here in the near term are not going to be going up, and perhaps could even go down compared to where they had been looking at 3 to 4 increases this year. So the crystal ball, I'd say, in the municipal market is hopefully rates stay low, but we've seen volatility, and I would expect to continue to see that interest rates bounce around a little bit. There's a couple of investment banking firms that do publish projections, and here over the next 9 to 12 months, they tend to see rates going down or staying flat. I think, again, my crystal ball depends on a lot of things, and I think we should expect volatility, and to the extent that you're ready to fund capital projects now, you're in a very low interest rate environment. Now's the time to lock in your rate like y'all have done in the past. I mean, you've had very good luck when accessing the markets and being in a low interest rate environment.
Yeah. This is my final question, I swear. So if this board adopts this and we issue the $3,766,000 of debt for the fiscal year 6/30/2020, we would need to go to market pretty early or late summer of 19. so we probably don't have a lot of interest rate risk there.
Yeah, I mean, I think our assumption in the model is that you issue it maybe mid fiscal year, and the timing of that debt issuance will really be driven by the project. The local government commission, in order to approve your project, is going to want to see bids in hand or firm proof of project costs, as well as any permits that are required, and that tends to take some time. Even for an upfit process, you have to make sure you've found the building and have a long-term lease agreement in order to do the upfits. And the upfits may be not as much of a construction project as we've had with the park, or the school projects or the high school, but there may be some bidding requirements there associated with that too. So it's really going to be project driven, how quickly you can move with the project before we're in a position to be able to issue the debt. But the assumption is we issue mid fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I did some quick math based on the Mosley study, and it would take $55.3 million just to do 5 projects over 20 years in what their estimates were, and that was for courthouse renovation, a Health and Human Services building, a jail, a sheriff's office, and some of the smaller projects that we have. And their assumption in 2017 was a 5% escalation rate, and we've seen bids come in since then that would tend to say that that's increased exponentially. So we are maybe be more conservative with a 10% escalation rate. We think not. But that gives you an idea. Just four large projects and small projects coupled into that totaled $55.3 million. And you can see we're going to be able to move most of these projects for much less than that with this staggered approach. While I have the mic, the other thing I'd like for Mitch to clarify is we spent a significant amount of time over the past year asking questions about how to improve the rating. And I think what we heard from S&P in particular was we have a capital improvement planning process that's a 10-year plan. The board has adopted good fiscal policies. And I think the thing that may have tipped it this past year was that we have a better way to forecast our budget process because of the performance-based budgets you guys put in place about a year ago, because now we can forecast what, allocations we're giving departments. So I do think we've done about all we can do, unless you disagree with that.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think you all have done, like I said, a great job of controlling the things that you can control as part of the rating process. And I'd encourage you to keep it up and keep doing what you're doing. And we'll see how the economy evolves over time, and you may get there. But never say never, like I said.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ms. West or Mr. Bergoglio?
Nailed it.
Been practicing. All right, so we have the 5-year CIP before us. Some pretty exciting things in there if we can do it and accelerate some of these larger projects or accelerate all the projects, everything but the courthouse. So I think that's exciting. I would entertain a motion we can take action on this. Entertain a motion or?
I move to approve, Mr. Chairman. And I will say this, the kind of the out-of-box thinking on the sheriff's situation and the HHS, I think is going to be really beyond exciting that we can kind of move to make those things happen at the cost we are versus what it was going to cost to build new. It's tremendous.
Agreed.
Second motion.
Motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion?
I just want us to keep in mind the courthouse situation because they are in dire needs of help. So getting the extra room will be good.
Well, we clearly
Yep.
hear that, and but I think as Mr. Eller was alluding to, we've got to kind of get some people moved so we can get some people out of the way so we can do some things over there. But that is,
And the bursting over there, so that'll help get them moving along.
Commissioner Finney, Mr. Chairman, if I might, on the detailed version that Ms. West gave you in her handouts earlier, number 5 will start some of that process. So we will be able, with this plan, to be able to begin some of that because we'll have that space vacated, can start connecting those two buildings together, and this will free up some capacity. So I think you'll start seeing some of that, but to your point, we need to put more planning into that.
okay, any other comments, discussion? All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor of the capital improvement plan as presented, please raise your hand. That passes. Thank you. Thank you. Mitch from Davenport. All right.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move to the consent agenda. Anyone have any questions or comments, concerns about that? Seeing none, entertaining a motion to approve. Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. The consent agenda is approved. Next, we have the county manager's report. Mr. Eller.
Just a few things quickly, Mr. Chairman, because I know we're running over here. As Ms. West said, next month you'll hear our utilities planning process, which again hasn't changed a lot since the last plan that you've seen, but we want to update you on that. We'll also talk a little bit, obviously, about the budget process later on this month in preparation for June as well. So I'll be meeting individually with each of you and giving you an update on where we are with things. In addition, I'd like to thank all of our town partners. We have completed our interlocal agreements with all the towns. That has been, I think, a great process to go through and negotiating through that and making sure all parties are heard. So thank you for approving Moxville's tonight, and that will conclude all 3 of our towns and the partnership we have with them. In addition to that, I think we had a good meeting with our Fire and Rescue Association consultant, Mr. Boast, and look forward to continuing to speak with him as we go through partnering with our fire departments on the ordinance and the contracts we're working on. And then I want to remind everyone really about 2 things. One is our Census Count Committee had their first meeting. I'm feeling very positive about the plan we're trying to pull together. We need all of our citizens to really fill out those census forms online or physically. And that committee will be getting more information out about that. Also, lastly, will be our comprehensive plan dates. We have 4 dates that are coming up. Those dates can be found on our website and on our Facebook and social media account. Moxville, there'll be a meeting on May 9th at 5:30. Farmington at the community center there. Well, in Moxville, the senior center will be the place where that meeting will take place. Farmington Community Center on May 13th. We'll be at the Coolamy Library on May 16th, and then Bermuda Run Town Hall May 23rd. All those meetings are at 5:30. We encourage our citizens to come out for those meetings and to hear what our Blue Ribbon Committee has come up with. So with that, that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, do we have any old business to come before us this evening? Seeing none, do we have any new business? We've conducted all the business we can this evening. We'll move to commissioners' comments. So I'll start with Mr. Jones.
My grandson Jack is playing baseball at the complex right now, so I'm heading out of here to go down there and watch him play. It's a springtime thing, right, Commissioner? But I do want to say this. What we've heard tonight is exciting. From the senior center to the issue of the CIP, I just want to thank our staff and the leadership we're getting from John and Robin. And to me, you can throw your hands up and say, well, we just can't accomplish these things. We just can't do it. But to have a staff that thinks outside the box and works to make things happen, that's exciting. And I just want to thank you guys. Thank the other commissioners too for the leadership you play in this. And we're going to continue to work on our contracts and our ordinance with our fire departments. And I'm glad that process is kind of moving in a proper way so we can hear everyone out and make sure that we get contracts that we all can live with and that we're all happy with the understanding we can't please everybody all the time, but we can do the best we can to try to make sure it's good for Davie County. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Finney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out some things going on this week that we as a county need to get behind. Our Relay for Life is Friday night at North Davie from 6 to midnight. So that's a great chance to visit with people and raise money for a good cause and try to boost that event back up. Next week, there's going to be a human trafficking conference here in our county that's been put together by Joseph Ashburn. I'm very excited that he's done this. It's going to be a wonderful program. He especially would like emergency service personnel to be able to attend, or anyone that works in a capacity where that may affect your job. Eaton Funeral Home and myself are providing lunch for the people that attend, so you won't have to go out and rush to do that. And so if you're interested in that, contact Joseph. This past Saturday was International Firefighters Day, and in the month of May we celebrate Police Week and Teacher Appreciation and Public Works Appreciation and Nurse Appreciation. But I just want to encourage you to appreciate these people all day long and all year long and every day. We've had some pretty rough calls on emergency services in the past few weeks. This weekend, I was personally involved in some of them, and guys, you just don't know what they do until you've been there. So I just thank you all very much for everything that you do, and thank Kim and her staff so much for this aging plan. It was a lot of fun for me to be involved, because I think we had some very good conversations that we sometimes overlook, and hopefully it will help the whole community to pay better attention to what's going on around us. So, thank you.
Mr. Blakely.
Kudos for May Flowers. I want to thank all the staff for what they do every day here in the county. Ms. Shusky and your team, I salute you for the aging plan, which is well thought of, which is a very key, vital role in our county's success going forward. And also, I'm very excited about the capital improvement plan, and I appreciate John and all of you guys' hard work, because I know you have hit some doors and you had to turn around and figure it out, and I appreciate that. So thank you for what you do. Thanks.
Poindexter.
I'd just like to thank everyone for coming tonight, and hope we get to see you here next month too. Thanks to the Aging Committee for all the work that they've done on the aging plan. It shows that you put in some really a lot of thought and hard work into that plan. And thanks to the staff too for doing our capital improvement plan. I know how difficult this has been, and y'all have done a lot of good work on it, and thank you so much for that. Thanks to the firemen that we've talked to over the last few months. Sooner or later, we're going to get the kinks worked out of this contract and get something that we can all be satisfied with. Look forward to that happening. Just come back again next month. Thank you.
Appreciate everyone coming out and staying for what's turned into a protracted meeting. But anyway, some good things were accomplished, and I would echo some of the accolades that were delivered by the commissioners this evening about all that. So Anyway, with that, come back next month. It'll be fun. And with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion and a second. All in favor? We are adjourned.